Yes, I want to actually go over the orphanages that we found all over America and Canada in the 1800s, in the early 1900s. And it's quite interesting because, especially here in Canada, we are only hearing about the orphanages of a certain people. But the orphanages at that period of time were full of all different. And so I want to show you some of it, all different nationality. It was just full of children. And yes, they segregated the children from race, but they were full of children. And these are just some of the evidence of the orphanages and who these people were and how many of these orphanages were European children. This one is in Australia. There was a time when orphanages, children all over, that there were these orphanages. Where were the parents of all of these children? Look at this one. Where were the parents of all of these children? Because I'm going to get into the asylums next. The amount of asylum castles that were spread all over the United States, Canada, Australia, the known European, that were full of Europeans, the parents, the adults. Now, this would be what most people think when they think of orphanages. They think of the Aboriginal orphanages, which there were, and these children, some of them were abused. Other ones, especially the ones from the 60s and the 50s, many tell a totally different story, that they were actually educated, not abused. But the original ones, why was there such a huge amount of, and you have to ask these questions, of all of these children, of all these different races? We don't have orphanages like that today. Our population today is, from what the population was at this period of time, the numbers don't add up to the amount of children that were in orphanages to what they are today. So a lot of these buildings that were left from the previous civilization, because my point of view and what I've been looking at is that there was a destruction of our civilization. And as many try to date it, and I've tried to do it, and that seems to be really difficult, but it seems to be anywhere from like 1800 to about 1800 to about 1850, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later there, that there seemed to have been a worldwide destruction of this civilization. And we're going to call this civilization Tataria. It may not have been called Tataria, but it seems to have been called Tataria over all of the maps. And these people built homes like this and were living in mansions compared to what we live in today. And later on, when this civilization was destroyed, they used these buildings for all kinds of ways of housing people, massive amounts of people, mostly children. And the insane asylums were probably their parents, the ones who did not conform to the new way, to the new ideals, to erasing their history and telling them these children, all of these children in each one of these orphanages were programmed to believe a certain history. Most of them didn't even know their own last names, didn't know where they came from. Everything was erased, like the Native children, where we have reports that they were beaten if they used their original language. They had to have their hair cut off because they couldn't have their culture. These same things happened to these children because most of these children's parents spoke other languages. And the same thing happened to them. They were indoctrinated. They were forced not to speak or learn of their, or to even remember the history. And yes, there were even orphanages of Black people. So just give yourself an idea, and if you haven't looked into this to see the amount of children that were housed during this period of time compared to what we have today, and look at these, like, these are your ancestors. Like this. Our great family. Children, children, children. Everywhere. There is some that say, well, you know what, they were incubi, or they were made in a test tube, and then they just let out all of these kids, from underground where they were incubating infants. And there is a little bit of information that talks about that when you're going into the, what did they call those? The expos and that, because they did have incubators that they showed that they had all of these premature babies, which kind of shows that they were doing something and had more technology than we know today. And of course, they like to put the age of the buildings on them, but that doesn't mean that this building, because remember, if you go through my last video, and that's why I did the last video, to show you about the lunacy of saying that these buildings were built when they were by the population of the people, and also what they tell us in modern history of their technology. But what we do find is orphanages and buildings and insane asylums. Again, another orphanage of European children, programmed with a new history. They say that the reason why they took they tried to make us believe the reason why they took all of these children, because the mothers were a bunch of harlots, and they just kept on having sex outside of marriage, and the law was, if it was an illegitimate child, they must take them. There sure seemed to have been a lot of illegitimate children. It's how we buy the stories they give us. New England's Homes for Little Wanderers, 1910. These were the little wanderers. And look at this, so they're now training them to be soldiers. How do you change a society history? Well, I think one good way is take all the children, put them in orphanages, teach them what you want them to know. All of the children from all of the different places. Teach them what you want them to believe about their history. Teach these people that, I have to go back here. Teach these orphans that these orphans were the culprits and put these orphans here. Instead of these orphans were taken away from their parents. And these orphans were taken away from their parents. And so were they. And look at this. And so were they. It's amazing we do not have huge, massive amounts of orphans today, to the point of what they had back then. Look at these children, how they took care of them. Workers in the fields, they worked these children. They worked them. They taught them. These children were really what built our society. Most of us come from these children. Most of Americans and Canadians who have been here long term come from these children. The orphanage children. And it's really sad when you see such a hate towards one race of these orphaned children from another race of these other orphaned children, because that's what they've been taught. They've been taught to hate each other, and that the other one did it to the other, and when it was not true. Something really bizarre happened, and all of our ancestors, most of them, well, all of us come from these displaced people. I know Rh negative on a whole can seem to trace our lineage further back than most, but many people get stuck at this time period, and they cannot go any further because these children were re-educated, retold who they were. Everything about them was told to these children, and they had no history that they could remember. And that's why, at least according to my opinion, why you had so many people in insane asylums. The mums and dads. In the insane asylums too, if you look into them, it's pretty crazy. A lot of these sane asylums, especially in the earlier days, would house everybody together. It wasn't necessarily a woman's dorm or a men's dorm or even a dorm where, and they would drug up these people. They would give them lobotomies, and they would put them all together. And there were a lot of children that were born from these insane asylums that were then again moved here and trained and given a history, given a past. All of them. When looking into Tartaria and mud floods and destruction, it's so obvious that we have had huge change to our history of what really was, who is what was our society like, were we really the people that they say we were? What was the history? Like I said, looking at Edmonton, Alberta in the last video, showing the massive buildings here in an area. Look at that. Massive buildings here in an area that should not have had anything of castles with 5,000 population, and yet there was hundreds of castles throughout the Edmonton, Alberta area. it seems like what we were looking at was a massive, beautiful society. I would say that would be, Los Angeles, 1900. A massive, beautiful society like this that had the capability, skills, and technology to build buildings like this. The infrastructure that had to be in place to be able to build a building like this, to just even put the top onto a building like this, to even, we got to remember, there had to have been masonaries, there had to have been window glazers, there had to have been bricklayers, there had to have been iron workers, there had to have been carpenters, there had to have been factories to do all of this. And many of these buildings have huge slabs of granite for their floor and their walls and their foundation. But we are told that these young people enslaved these people, and they are the fault of everything. Even, look at this, how these children were treated. And this was England, it's saying. Again, believe me, these children were told to smile. Some just couldn't do it. They couldn't, no matter how hard they were told to smile. Look at this little girl. These people just ended up in a form of slavery. These girls became incubators, slaves, basically. They were sold off. A lot of them ended up being sold off to farmers and ended up having children by the fathers that adopted them. And that seemed to have been the plot for a lot of these young girls. So when you're looking at your history and you're hearing and you're very angry because you think that these people have done everything bad to you, and you decide that you want to go and burn down these old Tartarian, that they call churches now, which I believe they were healing centers and they were remnants of our past, because they're just trying to get you to destroy all of the end remnants of this society where these children were stolen from by people like these guys. We're hearing so much of that today about transgendering our children, and if you don't, they're taking away children if you don't. You know, when you start to look into these people, and I'm talking about priests in general, their initiations and everything, well, that's a whole other subject about who these people were at that time. We're running all of these orphanages. And they just ended up, the best, most compliant ones ended up taking care of the other ones. Because these ones are probably ones that were here, and now they're just taking care of everybody. Look at this. Company of Orphan Children. So, now, I went over numbers and statistics before, and I've shown you how it just depends on where you look at the numbers, because they change drastically about the amount of children that were in these orphanages. And it doesn't seem reasonable. People will say, well, they were just the children of all of the people around. We're told during this period of time that there was very sparse amounts of population. Basically, the population were these children and the people who were in the insane asylums. and a few other people that were scattered around that took in these children. And these people, the indoctrinated, became the abusers. I later on, when I was about 5 years old, had to spend a summer in an orphanage in Edmonton. And I will tell you, it was not a pleasant experience. It was not a pleasant experience. And that orphanage were only people that looked like me. And it was only girls. So, when you're thinking about picking up your torch and attacking one group of people, you know, they say white privilege. White privilege? What in the world does that even mean? Because I know here in my country, the only privileges you get is if you are a minority. That's truly the way our government is set up. You must be a minority, you must be an immigrant, you must be one of some other to be able to get special education, to get anything from the government, any help. It is not set up for these people. There really is not really such a thing as white privilege. I don't know. You know, what does white privilege mean? They don't seem very privileged. We just ignore this. Everybody ignores this. Everybody ignores this. Everybody knows about Oliver Twist, and they just think they were all just fables and stuff. All of these stories, you know, that we've got of Anna Green Gables and of the orphanages of all of these children. But we still want to blame them, these beautiful things, as being the worst. We were told a history. We were told a history, his story, not our stories. And these children were just as abused, were made into slaves, sexually, as breeders. Even going out as, if I could even say it, the accounts of prostitution that these orphanages cater to of these children. My next video, this one, we're going to keep it at this, of the orphanages in the past and the amount of children that were there. We're going to leave it at this, and I'm going to talk about the next video will be on the asylums. We have to look at our past and really understand what it is that we are looking at and why we cannot trust anything that the media or governments tell us about our history. Live and love alike. Talk to you later.